You're most welcome to this evening's Let's Talk Equine. This is the last webinar for 2023, and I'm really happy to be joined this evening by both Nicole Groyer and Erin Campbell of Connolly's Red Mills. So thank you, ladies, for making time on this wintry night to be with us. You're both very welcome.
We're delighted to be here. Thank you very much for having us.
You're more than welcome. And Nicole, just to check that I can hear you okay there as well. You're also most welcome.
I'm here. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, for having us, Wendy.
And poor Erin is struggling with a little bit of a dose this evening, but hopefully we'll manage to carry her through for tonight. So huge appreciation to those that have joined us this evening, and your company is appreciated, but as much as that, also your questions and your interaction over the course of the next hour and a bit would be really appreciated also. I know the two ladies are only chomping at the bit to try and help you all out there as best they can, and are really looking forward to hearing from you as well. So I suppose, maybe to start with, if the two of you could give our viewers a little bit of an insight. Maybe I'll come to you first, Nicole. Maybe you could introduce yourself a little bit, what your own interest is in horses and where you're coming from.
Yeah, so my name is Nicole and I'm part of the Red Mills technical team. I've been with Red Mills for 5 years now, so I would have started off on the international markets and now I'm on the Irish market. And yeah, it's a really rewarding job. It's great working with people and their horses and seeing the results and even following those horses. And I suppose then on my side, I'd have horses at home and would have grown up around horses. So it's a huge interest for me, and even being out and about at shows, competing with my own and, following the sales, different things. It's great to keep in touch with how those horses are getting on and then provides the advice around it. So yeah, it's a great job to be looking and advising, I suppose, every day and working in something you love.
Absolutely. And you breed a little bit as well, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I've just started that. So
a little breeding project underway.
Yeah.
And Erin, how about you? Where are you based and what's your story?
So I've just come back home to Ireland. I was in the UK for a good few years and then working for Red Mills in the UK the last 2 years over there. And then moved across here in August. So I'm part of the nutrition team as well, doing a lot of the technical support for the sales reps and the direct sales team. And like Nicole, being out on the ground and talking to a lot of customers, discussing different issues, doing diet plans, lots of different bits and pieces. And I think that's kind of the beauty of the job, is that no 2 days are really the same. There's a lot of different things going on, and on the technical side then looking at different ways we can always improve and develop, especially for the supplements and things like that. So there's always loads going on, and it's really interesting. So yeah, it's good.
I suppose really nutrition is one of those areas, isn't it, where there's, not alone a lot of diversity in the sense of, even just looking at like the product profile, but there's a diversity across the range and type of horses that you're trying to manage, and whether it is breed type, whether it's their genetic makeup, whether it is the environment they're in, whether it is the type of management they're under, whether it is the jobs they're being asked to do, all of that. There's such a huge range, and there's also such a lot of variant opinions and ideas around how that maybe should all be managed as well too. So I guess it's not an easy job either to navigate.
There's a lot of traditional ways of doing things, or ways people would have fed for generations that have passed down. But yeah, look, everyone's environment is different. They're different types of horses. So that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah. So I suppose maybe like for people to bear that a little bit in mind as well too, as we work our way through the discussion. And I know that you'll be paying reference to that as well as we talk through. So I'll pop up the screen share here, and get that actionable to begin with. So yeah, if you want to maybe give us a little bit of whether I come to you, Nicole, maybe just while I'm sorting out my screen here in full, if you could give us a little bit of an introductory into kind of overview of what you intend to talk about this evening. I just have to sort out my video panel here now.
Yeah, so it's just to have a chat about I suppose the kind of basics of feeding. There could be a whole webinar on each individual topic here. There's so much to delve into, but just to kind of look at I suppose the basics around breeding. So looking at this time of the year, you've got mares that are in their last trimester or coming into the last trimester for foaling next year. You might have barren mares you're hoping to get in foal. So that whole breeding side and management there. Then growth. So we'll have a lot of weanlings now, yearlings, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds out or maybe in, depending on people's setup. So how to feed those, and then your performance horses. So those horses being broken, maybe one's coming in after a break to start the new year. So it's just to touch base and kind of, I suppose, look at all the basic things. And then if people have questions, we can go into a little bit more depth on each. But it's just to give a broad, I suppose, understanding. And then there's always more tailored advice that we can give if people want to get in touch individually.
For sure. And I guess it's a little bit of, what you're coming across when you're out and about and traveling around the country and, meeting at farm gates and having those discussions with owners and all the rest of it. So,
and I think that's I think it's like what we're doing this evening is, I suppose, very much an overview. Like Nicole said, there's so much more you could say on each topic, but it's something to bear in mind where we're saying about feeding the individual. Like these are kind of guidelines on each aspect, but like you mentioned earlier, Wendy, it's very much down to the individual. So with individual queries and individual case studies, I suppose it's best to always contact the nutrition team rather than taking one example and kind of running with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I think if we even think about, even just think about human nutrition for a moment and think about, there can be, I don't know, like 4, 5, 6 different people around the table, and they're eating in the same way every evening, but they respond differently as individuals to that diet as well too, so there's that context to things as well too. But so which of you wanted to kick things off?
I think I'll kick it off, Nicole, will I?
Yeah, go for it.
Go for it.
I'll do the easy stuff. I'll talk about the basics and then Nicole can do the rest. So I think a big thing that we always find when we're talking to customers is that you can never, no matter what, you can never underestimate the basics of like feeding rules when it comes to horses. So horses are designed naturally to be grazing on the hills somewhere, that's what they were evolved to be. And they're designed to be what we term trickle feeders. So their digestive systems are designed to have more fiber than anything else. And so their digestive system hasn't changed over the years, but what we do with them has changed drastically over the years. So we then feed them differently because they need a certain level of energy for whatever it is we're asking them to do. But yet their digestive system is the same. So it's something that we always need to come back to is they're what we call hindgut fermenters. So that fiber aspect is so important. And as a result, your forage is the most important part of the diet. We are obviously a feed company, and that is important for energy levels and what you're doing with them and meeting vitamin and mineral requirements, which aren't always to the highest level in grass, hay, haylage, whatever it might be. But that forage aspect is the most important part of the diet. So it's always a huge benefit. Not everyone has done it or access or whatever, but getting your forage tested is like probably one of the best things you can do, because then you know what you're dealing with. Like everything we put in a bag of feed is there. It's on the label. You know exactly what levels are of everything. In your forage, you don't know unless you get it analysed and get it tested. At least then you know what you're matching up and if it works, essentially. And if your grass is, for example, Irish land is particularly generally low in copper, then you know that you're always adding a little bit of copper, obviously, with the hard feed, but you might know that it's a little bit lower than usual, so I might need to supplement copper. So it's things like that that can be really beneficial if you get your forage tested, you know what you're dealing with. And because it's so important, it's the quality aspect. That's why you get it tested. It's knowing what quality that forage is. It's all well and good feeding ad lib forage and saying, oh yeah, they get plenty of it, but how good is it?
And I suppose as well too is be mindful that, you know, in your hay store you may have more than one batch of forage as well. They may not have all come from the same source or paddock. And so therefore there may be variances in the quality between even what you have on store, and also for the period and duration of which it's stored, that it may change in that period as well too. So you should do that. And would you kind of, I suppose, you know, in the context of in the general round of the customers that you're dealing with overall, like what proportion are actually testing forage, do you reckon? Is it becoming, from your perspective, more of a commonality now, or is there still a bit of resistance to that?
I think like it's hard to put numbers on things, but I think it's becoming more popular. That people are realizing the importance of it, because I think we've almost getting to full circle now where people are seeing the negative effects of not feeding A, enough forage, and B, good quality forage. And like you were saying earlier about having different batches and things, even you're getting it from the same supplier all the time, the first cut to the second cut could be different. Like how mature that grass is affects how your hay and haylage comes out. So there's lots of different factors that can affect things. I think it is becoming more popular.
And when you have a customer that has done the analysis, that then allows you to be much more specific in the product that you advise and the quantities of that, and potentially, you know, actually even able to save the customer money in the long run as well.
100%. It allows us to build diet plans, I suppose, in the right way, because you know what you're dealing with because obviously the forage should be the majority of your diet. So if that's the majority of your diet, then at least we know what we're dealing with and we can match it up against. And a lot of the time, if someone has really good hay or haylage, and maybe they're not doing extremely high intensity exercise, all they need is a bit of balancer. So it definitely can save people in the long run.
Good. Will I move on a slide?
Yeah, you can click on there.
Okay. Let's get my mouse going on the right page here. So where do you want to take us here?
So I think it's just looking at, like I've touched on kind of why we need to look at the basics, but it's kind of the different things you need to take into consideration before you look at what bag of feed do I buy. So there's lots of different aspects that can affect how you might feed in a certain way. So for example, like the things that are on the screen there, like age, sex, weight, breed type, they can affect, like weight is one thing, but breed type they can be a good doer, they could be a poor doer. They could be the same weight and the same breed, but one could be a really good doer and literally only need, you know, a cup of balancer. The other mightn't thrive so well and needs a more calorific diet. So these are all things you need to take into consideration before deciding on your diet, is what I'm getting at. So those are the things you can't change, you need to consider. Then level of exercise and performance, that'll affect what kind of energy levels you're looking at. So do you need a really high energy feed, in terms of, you know, racehorses are obviously fed a little bit heavier than someone who's going out hacking 2 or 3 times a week. And the main rule that we always relay to people is that you need to feed to suit exercise and not exercise to suit your feed. So always take into consideration the level of exercise and also performance. So then if you're competing and things and it's generally going up in intensity, sometimes it's only a case of slightly increasing levels of the same product. There might be times where you want to add in a different product. That's where we come in on that individual basis and would review things. I've mentioned obviously the hay and the quality of grazing. Quality of grazing is also important, not just hay and haylage. Obviously your grass is a huge thing that you need to have a look at for the same reasons. Temperament is something that we can control to a certain degree, but not always change. So like if you have something that's really excitable and difficult to get a handle on, then you might want to opt for maybe a lower starch product so that you're not looking at that, what we term high release energy or fast release energy. And things like any sort of associated nutritional concerns with previous cases of ulcers, tying up, laminitis, EMS, any of those things, again, you'd be maybe looking at lower starch products or whatever, but it's something that needs to be taken into consideration before you look at the diet. And then also alongside that, the environment. So we've talked about grazing and grass, but also are they out during the day, in at night, vice versa? Are they stabled full time? If they're stabled full time, obviously you need to take into consideration they'd be getting purely hay rather than any grass. It's just all things you need to consider before we then look at actually building a diet.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose maybe as well too, you know, the impact that stress can have on an individual as well too, and the level of maybe even transportation that they're undergoing, or their changes in their social structure, their friends, their mates haven't been divided from them, or, you know, lots of different things can impact an individual. And, you know, there are extraneous factors that sort of, you know, one might think that it's the diet that's at fault, but it's actually something else that's going on in the whole situation as well.
And I think, like you mentioned, stress, like stress can change all the time. So all of these things, yeah, we're saying take them into consideration before, but kind of you always need to be thinking about them. It's not that you can just decide on a diet and then go, oh yeah, grand, that's it sorted.
Yeah.
It's something you need to be thinking about all the time, really.
And what about the scenario whereby people, they've, you know, maybe had chosen a particular product that they're using, and they kind of decide, oh well, you know, actually maybe it's producing more condition than what I'd anticipated. So instead of, you know, actually looking at maybe changing to a different diet plan, they have what they're feeding of a specific type of feed that has a different feed label recommendation. Is that something that people do, or it causes problems? Or
I think that's where the one-on-one with us is very important. Like we're always on the end of the phone. You can always ring Red Mill's office and ask a query, and one of the nutritionists will get back to you. So before you decide, oh, do you know what, I'll just switch to this feed, or I'll change to these levels or whatever, just give us a quick ring and we can have a chat with you. And it's important for us to have a chat with someone, because you might send in an email with one line on it, but actually we need to ask a lot of different questions about all these factors on the screen to get the full picture, to then give you a bit of advice. So I would just say it's individual and use the resources that are there.
And I know so often, you know, people are kind of aware, or, well, you know, I suppose there's maybe more awareness now about the need to like think before you make dramatic changes in the diet, and to do things gradually, and, you know, all of that, and, you know, build up the amount of feed if it's to be built up over a time period, rather than just, you know, deciding today I'm going from here to there. But I think sometimes maybe, and, you know, you give your perspective on this as well with regard to the forage side of the house. I think sometimes changes can get made there, you know, with a more abruptness, in not thinking that equally can have an impact.
Yeah, like it doesn't matter what side of the diet you're looking at. We always recommend gradual changes. And that's because of, like we mentioned, how the horses are designed. Everything moves through so slowly, so abrupt changes cause issues. We don't say that for no reason. Like they cause problems, so you have to do it gradually, and obviously that's where things can then sometimes go wrong.
Mm-hmm. And just to touch on the performance side of things before we move forward in slides as well. You know, you mentioned there when you were speaking about the digestive system, like obviously, you know, the impact of high carbohydrate, high grain diets and all the rest of it. Like, does one tend to see these issues more exclusively with the performance horses, or are they creeping? Are they also crept across into the young stock and the breeding stock? Are they issues that are exclusive to one group or another, or what's your experience with that?
Not really. So, like, there's been studies done where ponies roaming the hills that have never had any sort of husbandry or human interaction have had ulcers. So things like that can happen anyway. Yes, we have seen that high grain diets can have an impact on things like that. So the prevalence rates are higher in things like obviously racing and high performance show jumping and whatever. So it's probably more prevalent in higher level performance. But what I'm trying to say is it can be there no matter what. So it's a case of managing things rather than, I suppose there's almost like a perception at the minute that everyone has to be afraid of starch, and you don't. It's just managing things and controlling things in the right way. And that's why it's so important to look at what you're doing, how you're doing it, when you're doing it, and for types of high level performance and energy, you sometimes need a certain level of starch. So it's not something that I think sometimes people are afraid of it, and you don't always have to be. But yes, there are issues there, but they can happen anyway.
Okay. Will I move forward a slide for the moment?
Yeah. Keep it moving.
Okay.
I think I've kind of touched on this already. By blabbering on, apologies. But I think that, so obviously we touched on forage quality, the considerations you need to think about, and then the next stage is coming to choosing what hard feed you're going to use. There are a huge range of products. It can sometimes be quite daunting to look.
Mind-boggling for people, I think, at times.
Yeah, and a lot of the feedback we would get is, well, there's so many products, how am I supposed to know what to use? Again, that's where we come in, and that's why we have such an extensive team, because we don't want people going just picking a random product, because it just leads to issues. So I've just given a few like very brief examples here, and this isn't to say that if you have a Connemara, this is what you should feed it, because they're all different. But like, for example, it's just to show how every diet can be different. So for example, you might have a Connemara show pony. It's a good doer, and it's shown at the weekends. So you don't really want to give it loads of feed, but you want it to look lovely for the shows. So feeding it something like the Perform Care Balancer means you're not giving it a load of calories. A small bit of Define and Shine will help with that overall outlook and condition. And then there's sometimes supplements involved as well. What I would say is the likes of the Show and World, Define and Shine is a great product for condition and things, but obviously that needs to be weighed up with the likes of the Connemara ponies are often good doers. We don't want to then tip the scales and have them getting too heavy. So it is a very delicate balance. This is just pulling things out of the clouds, like brief examples.
I suppose maybe what you're coming at in another roundabout way is that I suppose in you know, in the background to everything, like the, you know, feeding is not just it's not a science in some ways. There is an art to it, and there's also the piece of being mindful and observant of body condition and how the animal is responding in its physical and obviously in its temperament and, you know, reactions and all of that as well too. But keeping a good mind on the observation of the body condition, would you say that's something that is so important in the background to all of this as well?
I think it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you have a show pony, a racehorse, a broodmare, a foal, a yearling, it doesn't matter. You always should be looking at their condition and monitoring them yourself, even if it's just by your eye. You don't have to have a weighing scales. Everybody should be looking at their stock and just keeping an eye on how they look and how they're doing. You will see if there's a difference, like if they drastically go downhill or they start hugely piling on the weight. It's not good either way. We don't want drastic changes no matter what. So it's just a matter of keeping an eye and trying to keep it as balanced as possible, I suppose.
What would you find are, I suppose, out there at farm gate level, the most common maybe mistakes? And this is not meant in a condemnatory way, but from the perspective of maybe trying to learn from it as well. What the more common mistakes are in choosing feeds for these good doers, or in the way in which the good doers are managed, or what are the tips maybe that you would offer people to do that in a more beneficial way for those animals?
I think the key is planning ahead. So when you come to particularly changing of seasons, so coming into the winter, coming into the spring or whatever, you'll always get changes in grass. You get changes of the season in terms of where your competition's going, if your season's ending, if your season's starting, no matter what discipline you're in. I think planning ahead is the key. So if you're, say you're finished now for the winter, you're gonna have a couple of months off, have a review now, have a look at them, see what they're looking like, see how they're doing. Take into consideration, obviously, the quality of your grass is going to go downhill a little bit. If it's something that you've had for a few years, you'll have an idea of, do they go downhill in the winter? Do they get a bit too heavy in the winter because they're not doing anything? And think to yourself, where do I want them to be when I bring them back in again for work? And then talk to us, and we can make a plan on, okay, this is what you're going to do now for the next 2 months. Then we might think of gradually increasing at this stage. And then, you're 4 weeks out from your first show. This is kind of where you want to be. And it's planning ahead, and then you'll get into a routine of how you do it most years. Because I think sometimes you get people panicking and thinking, oh God, like I've got a show in a week and he looks dreadful, or I've got a mare foaling in a month and she's got no condition, or it's planning ahead is the key, because sometimes, because we need gradual changes, if you wait till really close to whatever the particular event is, having a foal, going to a show, going to a race, whatever, it's sometimes too late, and there's not anything you can do in such a short window of time, because the changes have to be gradual. So planning ahead is key, I would say.
No, I'd agree with you on that. But coming back to the good doer side of the house, I suppose sometimes, like whether it's a brood mare or youngstock or whatever, I suppose what I'm wondering is, are there tips that you could give people for that nature of an animal that maybe kind of are a different approach than what sometimes you find where you find the errors are made in trying to manage those?
I think if I was to give you a general feeding rule, like, good doers generally are fine on balancer. Horses that don't carry condition quite as well probably need a more condition and a fully balanced feed, because they're more calorific. Balancers are lower in calories. Your fully balanced feeds, I know that sounds wrong terminology, but are more calorific. So that's, I would say, probably a key distinction.
And I think sometimes people maybe get put off a little bit when they look at a balancer bag of feed in the shop, and they see the cork or whatever, and they see the price tag that's associated, and balk. Maybe just kind of try and break that down a little bit in the sense of the relative cost of feeding with a balancer approach as against with stud, nut, or coarse mix.
It's you feed them differently. So your typical stud cube, for example, you feed by the stub scoop. Your balancer, you feed by the cup. So you're looking at 250 grams compared to 2 kilos. So your quantities of feed are very different, because your balancer is kind of the concentrated form of quality protein and vitamins and minerals without that high calorific aspect. So you're feeding balancers very differently. So your quantities are much lower. The bag lasts you a lot longer. So that feeding cost, you actually need to look at it and think, well, how many days am I going to get out of that bag? Your daily feeding costs are a hell of a lot lower, actually, with a balancer than what you would think.
For sure. And I know we're going to move on and talk a little bit about the breeding stock separately to the young stock and the performance stock as well. Will I push it on a slide at the moment? Will I?
Yeah, click on to the breeding there, and I think I'll let Nicole jump in there.
Good woman. Okay. All right, Nicole, handing across to you for this one then. So
so I suppose looking at the breeding side, you can divide this into a number of different areas. So if we start off with conception, so maybe there's mares that mightn't have been in foal this year, or maybe a maiden mare, or someone hoping to get a mare in foal early next year. I think there's loads of different factors. Obviously your day length, the temperatures, the weather, there's loads of external factors there that are going to determine your mare cycling. Nutrition is one of those factors. And I suppose when you're looking at the diet of a mare that you're hoping to cover, we always talk about that rising plane of nutrition. So you want them in good to improving condition. So in saying that, thinner mares, they're going to have difficulty in conceiving and holding that pregnancy. So that window of time, the first 40 days is where you have that early embryonic loss, and that can be associated with a low body condition score. Equally then your obesity, which is on the complete other side, a mare that is obese, that's also been linked to reproductive problems. So they can have longer intervals between ovulating, and, you know, with obesity and a lot of weight becomes decreased insulin sensitivity. You have a lot of factors going on in the body. And then you have your young maiden mares. So they might need a little bit more individual attention as well. So they might have a higher nutritional requirement than a mare that's had a few foals. But that would be your kind of key, that idea of good to improving condition coming into that breeding season. Then looking at fertility. So there is different key minerals and vitamins that will help with fertility. So first one being your quality protein source. So lysine, that's your key amino acid, your limiting amino acid. So this is the most important, and it's highest in quality protein sources like your soybean meal. So it's, I suppose, for people to really look at what they're feeding. So to turn around the back of the bag, have a look at the ingredients. And for a feed, you're always going to see your protein in the first, you'd like to see it, say, in the top 3-4 ingredients, depending. So say we'll take stud cubes, for example, you're going to have your oats, barley, maize, your triple grain, and then you're going to have a protein source. So ideally, you'd like to see your soybean meal in that bracket there to know that there's a quality protein there. So that's really important. Your omega-3s are great for fertility. So omega-3 is present naturally in fresh grazing. So if we think of the time of year that we're trying to cover mares now, that'll depend thoroughbreds versus sport horse. But a way of providing that in the diet and making sure that they are topped up on their omega-3 is adding something as simple as carron oil or linseed oil. So that is, carron oil is actually emulsified linseed oil, because that's sometimes a question that comes up. What's the difference there? But they are both a flaxseed oil, and they have high levels of omega-3. So that's a natural antioxidant. And then you have your vitamin E, which also ties in. It's another antioxidant, and your selenium. So they're your key minerals. And
Nicole, now for somebody out there who's wondering, what does this lovely antioxidant do for my mare or what?
Yeah, I suppose so antioxidants, yeah, in simple terms, you're trying to stop that oxidative stress or oxidative damage. So when that mare produces the follicle that you're supporting, you're trying to limit any oxidative stress there. So, you know, I suppose everyone will know each individual mare. Some mares might have problems going in foal, others not. And it's about providing, I suppose, support. And again, as Erin has said, it depends on the individual, and that's where you get in touch and we would see, okay, maybe this mare needs to be on a supplement, you know, 28 days a month before conception, and maybe 28 days into pregnancy as well, just to make sure that she's supported at that key stage. But yeah, you can get very in depth in that, but it's just to try and, I suppose, promote and make sure that those follicles and eggs are as healthy and ready to
And I suppose, like we've said earlier as well, recognizing that, you know, there's multiple factors that contribute to the overall fertility outcomes as well too. And it's, you know, nutrition is one of the building blocks to ensuring good outcomes are had, and it's working with your vet, sure everything.
Yeah, there's so many other factors as well. Yeah.
We're certainly not here saying that this is the, you know, the mecca.
Gonna get your mare full in in the click of a finger. Yeah, no, it is one aspect, and it's a factor that, you know, it's suppose if you're monitoring your horse's body condition, then you just need to see whether that animal needs individual attention to help. Maybe they have an issue with fertility, or and you can target it then. So
I mean, from your experience at farm level and going around the country and seeing the situations at farm level, you know, the maiden mares, the barren mares, is it such that, you know, people really kind of tend to understand that they need to have those not in that, you know, over condition? We can sometimes feed, like we can kill with kindness sometimes. You know, I often think as well too around, you know, rugging animals as well. Like we sometimes you feel cold and you want an extra jersey, so let's put another rug on the mare, you know. Do you think that there's that can be a mistake, we'll say, that is made out there, is that mares are over conditioned, those barren and maiden mares, before trying to get them breeding?
Yeah, I think, no, there's good education out there, and I think a lot of people will make that mistake once, where they have a mare that's carrying a lot of condition, and in turn might have a difficulty foaling, and then all of a sudden won't go back and foal and has issues. And I think a lot of people, it's very hard with a brood mare, because she's already carrying a lot of weight, and her gestational weight is going to increase in the last trimester anyway. So but I rarely come across very extreme cases, if you like. There might be mares that are, say, a maiden mare that's finished racing, and you might have enough time to get them in foal this year, but they could be quite light or race fit coming out of training. So you might have scenarios like that, where you're trying to increase their condition and not be on that rising plane of nutrition. But no, like we'll look at now, say, maintaining a healthy pregnancy, and I suppose feeding throughout the pregnancy then will affect how that mare is carrying condition, and then whether she foals and is going back in foal or not, is how people can manage the body condition. But so maintaining your pregnancy for the first few months, you're on a maintenance diet, and a lot of fetal growth. I think we actually have a slide to show that fetal growth isn't linear. So you have a huge amount. Is there a slide there? Yeah, there is. I was thinking. So there's your 7-8 months plus. That's a critical time for your development of the fetus. And I think when you're feeding the mare, you need to think of the foal at this stage, because everything you feed the mare is going into the foal. So the foal at this stage is going to accumulate what we call liver stores. So your key minerals like your iron, copper, zinc, manganese. The foal is going to store this, so when it's born and on the ground, it's obviously going to be feeding from its mother, but that milk is not going to contain those key minerals. So when it's on the ground, it's going to have those stores to feed from and support it in the first few months of life. So really, your feeding for the foal starts in the mare, and it will depend on the breed type you're feeding. So if you are feeding a draft mare or a conny mare that is a good doer, is out on grass, and you start to look at the back of the bag of stud cubes and think, okay, I need to increase my feeding rate to 4 or 5 kilos, what's going to happen is that mare is going to put on a lot of weight. Now you are feeding the right nutritional requirements for that mare at that stage of pregnancy for her body weight. But if that horse is a good doer, you need to look at options like a balancer. So what you would do there is you would say half the recommended feeding rate, in some cases bring it right down to maybe even 1 kilo, and you would fill in that gap with a balancer. So that way, like Erin had mentioned and discussed, that your complete feed and your balancer, the difference there is your balancer is calorie free. So you're still meeting those key requirements, you're still meeting your protein requirements, but you're not filling the calorie gap. So equally, might be a mare that needs that extra calories, and a stud cube or stud mixed diet will provide those and provide the calories and the nutritional requirements. So this is really where the growth of your foal and the skeletal development, everything is happening now in the last trimester. And generally, mares you can feed a maintenance diet, and it is really important to keep an eye on body condition. And there is ways of doing it. There's a body condition scoring graph where you would look visually and hands-on, feel your animals. That's another thing. You could go out to your mare in the field now and she's a big woolly coat on, but unless you put your hands on and actually feel, you can then score that mare and then go back in a month's time, 2 months' time. Because generally, if you're changing a feed, it's going to take at least a month for it to kick in and for them to change. So your body condition scoring, taking pictures, but you're monitoring their condition, you're monitoring how they're getting on, maintenance diet, and then from 7 months of pregnancy, you're getting ready for the last trimester, which is critical for the foal in utero. So that's really then your mare in their last trimester. And then your next stage is foaling. So hopefully you have a nice straightforward foaling and a healthy foal on the ground, and the first thing that foal is going to do is go for the colostrum, the first milk. So foals are born without any immunity, so it's really important that foal gets that colostrum. And again, there is ways of targeting your colostrum quality through their diet. And I suppose knowing your mare and the history of that mare's colostrum production is really important. So there's ways of measuring your colostrum with your refractometer. And if you have a mare that has poor colostrum year on year, there is ways you can target in the diet to make sure that she has everything in there. So your udder development is also happening in that last trimester. And there's lots of studies on your colostrum. And actually, Erin, you looked at an article, didn't you, on yeast supplementation and colostrum? So
Yeah, there's a few different ways to kind of, I suppose, optimize colostrum quality. Nicole mentioned antioxidants earlier, so selenium and vitamin E, in particular, can help to improve colostrum quality. Also, live yeast supplementation has seemed to have an impact on colostrum quality and milk production of your mares. So within, say for example, the likes of, there are some supplements that are just live yeast supplements, but there are also some of our feeds that would have a live yeast in it. So for example, the Groyer balancer has a form of live yeast in it. So by feeding a little bit of balancer alongside your stud cube or whatever, there's a lot more benefits than just, people think in a bit of balancer there can't be much, but particularly in the likes of the Groyer balancer, there's live yeast, there's moss and phos, which are pre and probiotics, and then higher levels of selenium, vitamin E, and Nicole mentioned earlier as well about omega-3s. So there's higher levels of omega-3s in those good quality ingredients like soya, so, and linseed as well. So like there's ways of optimizing it. It doesn't always have to be a supplement, but particularly live yeast supplementation has been quite beneficial alongside antioxidants.
And just coming back to the omega-3, because somebody did put in a question into the Q&A about that, is there, like, and I nearly would put this not just in terms of omega-3, but in any supplementation, like, is there a risk of overdoing it with, I think sometimes people can maybe, latch on to a bit of information that they get about particular supplementation and what positive benefits there may be for it, and they go that route without maybe sometimes looking back at the product that they're using and what like Nicole referred to, like, and yourself, that the ingredients can already be part of what's already in the diet. And I suppose that, and I double fisted then as well, in the sense of, if somebody is doing as a feeding regime where they're using, like, where they haven't looked at their forage and they're using a stud nut or a mix, and then they decide they're putting a balancer along with that as well too, like, can it all get a little bit confused?
I think like there are there are feeding guidelines for a reason. So for the likes of Karen oil or linseed oil that Nicole mentioned, there are certain levels that we advise you to feed, and that's for a reason. So particularly with oils, if you go too high, well, first of all, they're a fat source, so yeah, you can overdo it. And it'll result in additional condition that you don't want or need. But also with oils, sometimes you can get looser drop-ins. So what I'm trying to say is there's a feeding guideline there for a reason. So that's what we would kind of consider alongside a fully balanced diet. So we take into consideration that you're feeding, say, one of our feeds, a general level of hay or haylage. You could then add that amount of oil, so it's 60 to 90 mils roughly, for an adult horse. So I wouldn't advise anyone to, just because they think omega-3s have an anti-inflammatory property, oh, I better give loads of that. No, there's a guideline for a reason.
And yeah, different minerals will have different thresholds as well. So it's say the likes of your selenium, that mineral has a really small threshold, so you can very easily go toxic, or you could be very easily deficient. It depends on what mineral you're looking at, and they all interact with each other as well. So your copper and zinc, your calcium, phosphorus, and if you supplement one over, I suppose when you're buying a feed that's fully balanced, everything in there is balanced to the correct ratio. So when you start adding in on top of that, you are changing that balance. Equally, when you add straights to a complete feed like oats or barley, you're diluting that value as well. So it's just, I suppose, looking at the full picture. But there's different things, and I suppose that's where there's no harm in even just double checking what you're doing with the nutrition team and looking at the whole picture. And that's why we have a form, and we go through every single question of supplement, feed, every angle, and then equally having your forage tested, that also builds in as well, because you can see what levels of copper are in the ground. That's a really important one and is deficient in most Irish soils. So it just helps build the full picture.
And I suppose as well too, maybe to bear in mind, like if you're feeding, whether it be mares or young stock in a group scenario, who's getting access to what.
Yeah, there is that third pecking order. Yeah, absolutely. That's the other side of it. And it's challenging feeding young stock out. And that's why feeding from the ground, so your grassland management and what's in your ground is so important, because realistically, majority of young stock are living out in the field in groups, and it can be very hard to feed them all individually, or there is ways of taking one or two in if they do need extra attention, but knowing what you have there is a great base. And yeah, there's a hierarchy and pecking order in most groups. So yeah, there's ways of managing that as well.
Maybe one of you who is continuing with this slide with me, Nicole, is it?
So we're on to
before we go to that, I just maybe ask Erin, if you have access to the Q&A, you might look at, there's a more lengthy query has come in there, and you might just have a little look at it before we try to tackle it. And we'll still have young stock to come to, so I'll come back to the questions on the young stock. Don't think I'm ignoring you there. All right. Okay, so yeah,
we can kick into young stocks, because I suppose we're looking at the foal now that's on the ground. So that foal for the first 3 months of life is hugely reliant on the mare's milk. And there is cases where you might have to step in and give a foal pellet, but generally, if you have fed the mare well and she's in good health and she's provided the right minerals for that foal in utero, good colostrum, you won't need to feed your foal. Now, obviously, you do have your sick foals, ones that may lose the mare, or be compromised from the start, that might need additional support. But generally, your first 3 months of life is the mare's milk. And I suppose then, from 3 months of age onwards, that's when your mare's milk yield is going to start to peak. And the foal is less reliant on the mare. You'll notice the foal's curious, starts to eat with the mare, will be eating away at hay and grass, and that's going in line with the whole, I suppose, the changes and the development of the digestive system in that foal. So by the time you reach 6 months, that foal is a totally different, it's able to digest forage a lot more efficiently than it would have when it was born. So from about 3 months of age onwards, that's a good time to start introducing a creep feed for your foal. And that's just for the foal to adjust to a feed. So for those microbes that are in that hind gut, so we describe that as the microbiome, for those foals to adjust, and I suppose they're familiar with that grain, so that by the time you're going 4 or 5 months of age, hopefully they'll be eating a little meal by themselves, and then weaning time without their mother, they're eating their feed. This also helps keep that growth curve steady. So we have an image there, and this is your continual growth curve. And I suppose what you're aiming for is a steady, moderate growth. So weaning is described as one of the most stressful times for the foal. And this is where you'll see a drop in that growth curve. And what can happen there is what we call compensatory growth. So you have a drop and then you have an acceleration up in growth. And that can just, I suppose, with the wrong management, maybe not the correct feed, there can be issues there with DODs, epiphysitis, a foal can go backwards. So look, there's loads of, weaning is only one. I mean, if the foal was sick, you're going to have a drop in the growth curve. Sales prep, so especially on the thoroughbred side, that's huge amount of work and stressful environment for the foal. Going to the sales, there's a lot of feed, they're going to be accelerating their growth curve. So it's always to, I suppose, look at the foal and try and keep their growth as steady as possible. So introducing creep feed and having that foal on a feed at about 3 months, 4 months of age will prepare them for weaning. So then looking at what creep feed do I go for? So that would depend on a number of factors. So it would depend on the breed type of the foal. So whether it's a thoroughbred, a draft, Connemara, a sport horse, and that individual. So you might still have a very strong born thoroughbred foal that is very forward and doesn't need a huge amount of feed. And you might have a draft that is very maybe leggy, tall, and does need extra support. So you would look at the individual breed type, what stage they're at, and you would also look at what they're destined to go on to be. So whether you're preparing that foal for sale or whether you're keeping it long term till a 3-year-old, and what it's destined to be, that will also influence what type of diet it's going to go on. And yeah, I suppose it's about keeping the growth steady, that there's no growth spurts, because that's where you'll run into those issues, and making sure that they are meeting the requirements at that age, because they are growing, and that's when a lot of bone development's happening. And when they're out and moving, it's great. Their bone is always remodeling. So when they're in the pasture and moving around, so again, time of year is important as well. Your thoroughbred foals are going to be weaned a lot earlier than your sport horse foals. So they're being weaned onto a more nutritious pasture versus the winter months where you do have grass. It'll depend on the year. It's very wet at the minute. So some people might have youngstock out, maybe they're in, but equally you have your hay or your haylage there. So it's going back to that first slide, no matter what age group or type of animal you have, there's a lot of factors that you'd look at to determine what feed they're going on.
And I see somebody has a question in here around fasciitis or epiphysitis and in the knees or the fetlocks. I suppose nutrition is one side of this. Like the genetics can also play a factor. The level.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, genetics, rapid growth. Excessive body condition. Yeah. So epiphysitis is that swelling or inflammation around the joint. And we see it a lot when we term it a top heavy foal. So a foal that has a lot of condition. Now, this could be purely because of genetics, or maybe the mare is really feeding this foal well. And it's just about, again, monitoring their growth. And then you would intervene with, different ways of managing that. But looking from a nutrition perspective, a lot of that epiphysitis will come from overfeeding. and top heavy. So what happens is that foal is carrying too much weight for their joints, and their joints and growth plates are still changing and evolving, and there's a lot of weight and pressure on it, so you're going to get inflammation. So yeah, again,
the question that came in actually comes in along the lines of, can from a nutritional angle, can the epiphysitis be managed or prevented in feeding the mare herself, or just from the perspective of when you take up
creep feed?
foal?
Yeah, no, this all happens in utero. So the minerals you're providing that foal in utero by feeding the mare, that foal is going to have that on the ground when it's born and pull from those stores. And bone development is happening in utero. That's when the foal's skeletal development is beginning. So when that foal is born, it's going to get its calories, its protein from the mare's milk, and then it's going to pull from those mineral stores, and that's going to help that foal grow. So the more, I suppose, the minerals are needed for cartilage development, for bone development, and all those changes there. So by feeding the mare in foal, you're going to run less risk of having an issue. And then I suppose preventative is better than cure. So if you can catch that early and then monitor the foal's growth, you can leave well alone, because nature is going to take its course. The mare is going to feed the foal, and you'll intervene and provide a creep feed. Now, you need to provide the correct creep feed is the other side of it. So you could have your foal growing away steady, perfect, and then you give too much feed and you have that rapid growth, excessive body condition. So both angles, but it definitely starts in utero. Yeah.
And I suppose as well too, like when we think about youngsters, and obviously at the moment, like there's a lot of weanlings out there, and some of those had an easier experience with weaning than others. And I suppose, there's been those that have been maybe bred and stayed on the farm where they bred, and they were put on a creep feed, and they had as relatively stress-free a weaning process as was possible, and they are maintained on the same forage and in the same feed as they were on before they were weaned, versus something that maybe has come home from a sales and
or shipped, or exactly.
And the new farm doesn't necessarily know what the weanling was on before. The whole thing was a big shift. What are the issues that you see there, you come up against, or the supports that are possible to give in the more stressed scenario there?
I think around, okay, so if we look at a stressful weaning time, there's actually an image there of the Frisco foal. That's a prebiotic and vitamins, so you can support the immune health of that foal around that time. So when there's a period of stress, you're going to have a lower immunity. Then when you have a lower immunity, you're going to be more susceptible to picking up different issues there, or scour, or the foal becoming sick. So I suppose looking at their gut health in a way of providing a prebiotic helps boost them. Other areas would be a foal that has been prepped, has been given a lot of feed, has gone to a sale and gone home, and then been left out. So you've got a rapid acceleration of growth with feeding rates, and then a complete drop off if they're left out. So a way of continuing that, especially if you don't have a lot of information of what that foal was on previously, the easiest way of doing that is looking at the foal's overall body condition. Does it need to lose weight? Is it at a good weight, or do we need to put on some weight? And if they're in good condition, or if you're happy with their condition, and foals are going to change. They don't need to look conditioned. You're actually better with an animal that looks light and is growing and is healthy. But your balancer is the best there. And a lot of, even on the thoroughbred side, studs will wean onto a balancer or look at feeding a balancer option there, because you're providing the right vitamins, minerals, the protein, but you're not providing the calories there. So the calories can come from forage, it can come from grass, and in that way disrupting any of the changes there. So that would be the best way of, if you're unsure of what approach to go, because you're definitely going to provide the minerals they need to grow, because they're still growing at that stage. And equally into yearling, 2-year-old stage, especially for sport horses, they don't need a lot of feeding, and they're happy out and they're healthy out. So the best way is to feed a balancer, and that way you're just keeping your mineral stores topped up, making sure that their whole diet is fully balanced. And then when you bring that horse into work and build on, that whole process a lot more seamless, because they have the base there.
So you're referencing, for example, Groyer in that regard, yeah.
Yeah, that would be our stud balancer, the Groyer, and it's great. It's fits perfectly into that youngstock picture, I suppose. And then we have a foal and yearling mix. You see our stud cubes. There's a whole range there, but I would advise, I suppose, ringing or looking for advice if you're unsure of what option to go for.
Somebody has Connemara's and they're living out and they're on hay and a picking of grass, and they're just kind of like, what should I be doing with these? And there's rose yearlings in the mix, and like that, it's you can make contact
yeah, absolutely, yeah. But yeah, a balancer would be ideal there, because you're balancing the forage portion of that diet. So if they're out on grass and they have hay available, they're going to get their calories and energy source from there. So topping up with a balancer will cover all bases there.
And I suppose as well too, with some young stock, like you'll have some weanlings who are going to have a very easy yearling year and a very easy 2-year-old year, and they're going to munch their way through the summer and have a very chilled out experience. And then there are others who potentially may be going to be brought to show rings, or have different more stressful experiences ahead of them. So again, it's looking at that side of things as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely taking, and Erin spoke about that earlier. It's planning and knowing what that foal is destined, what the plan is, and exactly, because you can't, especially with young stock, if you were to change very quickly their diet, you're going to get a rapid period of growth, and then you might see epiphysitis or a DOD creep up. So if you can plan long term and you know what the plan is for that foal, you can start gradually building up that foal, that it's less stressful, because big changes are stressful for them. And then once that stress, I suppose they all react differently. Some horses will really take that stress on, and then you have digestive issues, and then no matter what feed you give, they're not really utilizing it well, because their whole microbiome and hindgut is off. So
I think that I would also just like to add there, when Nicole's talking about the DODs and things, is sometimes what we find is, say for example, well, it's more so on the thoroughbred side, but if you've got a foal from the sales or something and they come home and they've been chucked out, and then you look at them 2 weeks later and you think, oh God, they don't look great. Sometimes what we find is then people panic and they fire the feed into him, and then you can again get DODs at that stage. So it's not panicking, even if they're a little bit under conditioned. It's gradually building, because the last thing you want is to pile it all in and then get the issues at the end.
Yeah, I think if that message alone goes out about anything got to do with making changes to diets, is to do things gradual, and that includes your forage or pasture changes and transitions as well too. It's to try and do things gradually if at all possible. And I don't know whether you want to deal with this now or whether we're moving on in slides, but I suppose, like it's one thing, your weanlings, your yearlings, your 2-year-olds, but then you move on up and sticking with the sport horse side of the house into the 3-year-old phase, and the work maybe starts to be introduced, and the backing, and I suppose some take it all in their stride, others not so much. Some, maybe come in already in a good place in body condition. Others come in maybe carrying a little more than they should after being out of pasture all summer. And, there's different scenarios that are at play there. And it's also, I suppose, for many, it's trying to manage not just the physicality of the animal, but also the you know, the energy levels and keeping them in a place that they can safely work them as well too. What would be your advice or tips, I suppose, around that sort of stage?
I think that's probably tied into the next few slides, where we're looking at types of energy sources and condition and top line and things like that. So I think that'll gradually feed into this. So whether it's you're starting from bringing your 3-year-olds in, or a horse that you've had for a few years and is just going into the normal season again, feeding for performance is, like, I think feeding for anything, there's the similar guidelines. You need to look at condition, body condition scoring. Feeding for performance in particular, you're looking at different types of energy sources and looking at top line development. So I think if you click on Wendy, there's the next.
Oh, sorry, oh, too quick.
Yeah, so like top line development, you're looking at quality of protein matched in with the type of exercise you're doing and considering the calories you're also having. So you need exercise to help build muscle. You also need the calories that they'll be receiving to be able to carry out whatever exercise it is and be broken down. But the quality protein and lysine is essential. So you can't build muscle without quality protein. We mentioned lysine a lot. Lysine's the first limited amino acid, meaning it can't be generated internally in the body. It has to be provided in the diet. So in particular, lysine is very important. And Nicole mentioned earlier, you get higher levels of lysine in your, what we call your high quality protein sources like soybean meal. So with providing high levels of lysine alongside the appropriate exercise and the right amount of calories, all together, those things help you build top line. Top line is very different than just general condition. And it's looking at that muscular outlook all along the top, and it's kind of making sure that you take everything into consideration. You can't just fire feed at them and expect them to build top line. It's not going to happen. And it takes, you know, the different factors into consideration for it to work. The likes of our new product Define & Shine is very beneficial for building top line because it's not just a conditioner, if you like. It's also got those high quality amino acids in there. So condition, yes, it matters on an overall basis, but top line in particular, you need to look at quality of protein that you're providing them with. And then I think if you move on there, Wendy, we're looking at the energy sources. So for these 3-year-olds, performance horses, no matter what they are, you match your condition, looking at how you're going to build your top line, which is kind of in those early phases of exercise and bringing them in and getting them going, and making sure you have the right type of energy. So the primary energy sources we have for horses are starch, fiber, and oil. So starches and sugars are what we term fast release energy, and fibers and oils are slow release energy. So starches and sugars are really quickly digested and absorbed into the bloodstream, which means that's why we call them the fast release energy, because that energy source is available so much quicker for the horse, whereas fibers and oils take a lot longer to digest and absorb, and therefore it's much more slower released into the bloodstream and then uptaken by the active tissues during exercise. So your natural, like, fizzy individuals, if they're already like that in temperament, you'd want to feed them a diet higher in fiber and oil than you would starch and sugars. So for example, the horse care range that we have is generally our low starch range. Horse care ultra is the lowest at 4%, and then horse care 14 you're looking at about 16%. In comparison, to give you an idea, racehorse cubes are about 30% starch. So that gives you a breakdown of what you're looking at in terms of starch levels and fiber and oil. With the likes of ultra, where you have lower starch, you'll have higher levels of fiber and oil. So it's not that horse won't have enough energy, it's just different types of energy. So it's making sure that you have it balanced. And it doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to perform because they have lower starch. They are going to be able to perform. They're just using a different source to get that energy. And again, it just comes back to the individual aspects and when you might use certain products. And it is quite individual. So like some of the competition range for like the sport horse targeted market is very fast release, high energy, like the competition 12, for example. That's perfectly fine to use in the right scenario, and it's not that it causes issues. It doesn't. It's just making sure that it suits that individual.
And I suppose the asks that are being requested of them as well.
Yeah.
And I suppose, you know, would say for example with youngsters, maybe even sometimes like considering the fat supplementation as opposed to the starch sugar kind of route is a safer option as well too for those when you're you know looking at their workload starting to increase.
I think if you're looking at bringing them in and you want to do things slowly and you want to make sure that they aren't, you know, too excitable and things, then yeah, it probably is. You're probably better off starting them on a lower starch, higher fiber and fat, and then you can build from there. So if you're going to go from, you know, lunging them for 20 minutes to then going and doing 3-day eventing, your diet regime is probably also going to change within that time frame. So it's perfectly fine to start them on a lower starch product at the start. And then when you get to the levels of 3-day eventing, they might need a lot more energy by then because you're asking a lot more of them. So it's fine to start slower and you can change along the way, but obviously alongside touching in with us and making sure you're doing it the right way.
And just on that, there's a lot of horses, I suppose, on the performance side now that are I suppose more blood type. So a lot of your show jumpers and eventers that are nearly full thoroughbred, or some are thoroughbreds, but you've a lot more percentage blood there, so you have a lot sharper animal, and that's where that horse care, that idea of fibers and oils, that slow release energy is really beneficial. And there is horses that would compete right up to Grand Prix level and event internationally on, say, like the likes of Horse Care Ultra, because that just keeps them, you know, you're not going to change their underlying temperament, but it keeps them focused by adding grain to that diet. That's just fizzy energy. So it really depends on the individual animal you're feeding. And you know, there's always horses that will kind of break the rules there. You think your more traditional type is going to need a bit more quick release energy, but there is some cases where they're better on a kind of more slow release diet. Yeah, so it's but there's definitely a huge change towards the low starch feeds, and a huge change in how we breed horses as well, and those more blood type foreign horses, and you see a lot of them go for a more slow release energy, especially starting off and backing a young horse. You know, just keeps, for even safety wise, keeps everything it keeps them focus. You're giving the right condition and nutrients without it getting to their head. So yeah, it's changed definitely in the last number of years, and people used to feed a lot of grains, and now we're switching more towards what the horse is designed to break down, which is fibers.
Yeah, I'm just looking at another question that has come in here, and I suppose before I actually will ask it, just I suppose, you know, we haven't really mentioned kind of the way in which feed is stored, or the environment in which feed is stored, whether that is your forage source or your concentrate source, and the utensils that are used, and the cleanliness of troughs, and you know, if somebody's using a wheelbarrow and it's been used for the mucking out, but the next minute then the feed buckets are going into it to go around the yard as well. And I suppose I'm talking in general about feed hygiene, because I see a question here that's asking around mycosorb, and you know, like obviously that kind of question of where mycotoxins come into play, and asking, do you have sort of do you have that nature of an ingredient in your products? But I suppose I'm just maybe kind of, I suppose, trying to throw a couple of things into the one little nut there around taking care around the way in which, you know, the feed environment is managed as well too. Do one of you want to say a little quick word on that?
Yeah, I think like hygiene wise, obviously you have to be as careful as you can. But at the same time, it's a yard. There's only so much you can do. I think when it comes to the likes of mycotoxins, they will always exist to a certain level. You can't remove mycotoxins, and actually that's the last thing we want, is to remove mycotoxins. We need a certain tolerance level. So mycotoxins will always exist. There's a very limited research in equines of actually tolerance levels of mycotoxins. There's a lot of research in cattle, pigs, sheep, and we're very much unknown in the mycotoxin aspect with horses. So as a result, mycotoxin binders are difficult to know the efficacy of them, because we don't fully know to the extent what mycotoxins do in the horse in terms of how much they can tolerate, how long they stay there for. When you use binders, is there levels of resorption? There's a lot to take into consideration, and the level of research isn't there yet in the equine aspect. It's there on the agri side. As always, the research is generally on cattle, pigs, and sheep before horses. So I think it's not something to be too afraid of right now. I think it's becoming popular that people are talking more and more about mycotoxins. But keep in mind, they have always been there. They need to be there to a certain level. It's not something that we need to be particularly afraid of all of a sudden. And I think we need to make sure that we have the research there before we go ahead and look at introducing mycotoxin binders. So we don't currently have mycotoxin binders in our feed. I'm not saying that's not something we're not going to do. We're always looking at new ways of improving things, and the main thing for us is that we're always science-based, and we are looking at the research. We're having talks with companies and seeing what's going on, but we haven't yet included in any of our feeds.
But I do think, you know, as much as what you say, a yard is a yard, I think as well too, I think people can kind of have due diligence around trying to
100%, yeah,
reasonable hygiene around.
Yeah, your feed room hygiene
should be clean, yeah.
And all of that as well too.
And what you're saying about the wheelbarrows and stuff, like being mindful of what you do, like there's a lot that you can do that's very easy to control. So yeah, there is plenty you can do to control hygiene in your own places.
And just as I take a slug of water there myself, because my throat was getting dry, I think water also is often the forgotten nutrient, and to ensure that it's available, and that it is, you know, you can get your water tested as well too, and make sure that everything is as it should be in that domain as well. It's an important nutrient as well too.
Yeah, it's very important. Fresh, clean access to water, and you can always get it tested.
Yeah,
is probably simple.
We're going to wrap it up shortly, but there's still a few questions here. There's somebody wondering what the key differences are on the two feeds here, the Ultra Cube versus the Horse Care 10.
So Horse Care Ultra is 14% protein, 4% starch. It's completely cereal grain free. Horse Care 10, the number 10 mean in reference to protein, that's 10% protein. It is also oat free. But it's a little bit higher in starch. It's around about, is it 14% roughly, Nicole? 16%?
Yeah. So you have your barley and maize.
Yeah, it's not cereal grain free. That would be probably two of the key differences. Ultra is completely cereal grain free. Horse Care 10 isn't, and there's also a protein difference.
And they're under that horse care bracket, so you have your care package in there. So there, all that care range would be high fiber, high oil, and a lower starch than your, say, competition range or your traditional.
Yeah, and within that care range, we have what we call the care package. So there's stomach care with a gastric acid buffer, hindgut care with pre and probiotics, skeletal care with elevated levels of vitamin A, D. There's muscle care with elevated levels of vitamin E and antioxidants, and then hoof care with therapeutic levels of biotin. So anything within the horse care range has the horse care package. There are also slight differences within each product, but the horse care range has what we call the horse care package.
And just Erin, reverting back to the longer query that there was earlier on in relation to diarrhea and whatnot, do you want to make any general comments in relation to that, or would you advise that person to contact separately?
I'd say that probably needs specific attention, but I think in general, like, there can be numerous factors that can contribute towards things like diarrhea. Hindgut acidosis is very common in all horses, doesn't really matter what they're doing. That can be often a cause of diarrhea. It depends what their circumstances are in terms of what they're doing right now, what they were doing before. If there's any changes, stress can have an impact on diarrhea. They mentioned, I think, did they mention something about probiotics and supplements? Anything associated with the gut, any supplements with the gut take time. So I would say contact us directly, because it would depend how long you've used any particular supplements for, whether you'd see an impact within that time. And then obviously there is the veterinary side of things, that if it's prolonged diarrhea, dehydration is a huge concern. So I would always speak to your vet if it's prolonged diarrhea. But if it's just general kind of, it's not that bad, but you're not happy with it, then just speak to us. And I would say generally with those queries, they're kind of more individual.
There's also a question there in relation to Cushing's and EMS, and whether you have products that sort of, I suppose, serve those customers as such. Again, emphasizing kind of the need to work alongside veterinary.
Yeah, any conditions firstly need to be diagnosed, not just suspected, and secondly then it's management with any metabolic condition. So both of those are metabolic conditions. Generally from a nutritional management aspect, it's only one factor in management of those, but nutritionally you're looking at low starch diets. So something like Horse Care Ultra or Grow Care Balancer would be two options there.
There's another person who's asking, they have in their opinion good quality rolled oats, and they're kind of looking for I suppose the direction in which the question is asked is looking for the weight of balancer that should be fed with them. But I suppose really, like, it's not easy to answer that in direct over the webinar here. Maybe perhaps that has to be taken as an aside, is it?
Yeah, if you're feeding oats, you're kind of looking at
relation to a mare in the last 3 months.
It would depend on the balancer as well. There's oat balancers, and then there's like the Grow Care balancer, and there's a pellet and a mix. So I'd say if they want to contact, we actually have an Ask Our Experts form on the website. So what you would do is fill in information about that horse and what they're getting. And if you do know kind of approximately, say, the weight, your height of the horse, we can work out weight wise what the feeding rate is, and then level of work or what stage of pregnancy that horse is in, and whether it be a competition or a brood mare. And then, you know, knowing, say, in kg or roughly how much you're feeding at the moment, and then you can calculate. There's always a ratio between oats and balancer, but that would be more specific. So if they want to contact directly, we can look through that.
Yeah, I think any of those directly, like, what do I feed, or what I'm feeding this, what should I do? Contact us directly. It's difficult to give generic answers for things like that sometimes.
Yeah, and I'd almost suggest the same for somebody who's asking about the 12-year-old cob mare with a cresty neck as well, too, to maybe get in contact.
Yeah,
so
there's generally an overweight issue if that's the thing, but it's not always. So it could also be metabolic. So I'd say contact us.
Yeah. Were there, I forgot you to a slide here on copper. Was there any comments that you wanted to add to those that you've said already? I think you kind of covered a couple of points already on the copper. Are you happy enough?
I think we're happy enough. The main point for us is that Irish land is generally low in copper, so always take into consideration that copper dosing is there. We have the Copper Max paste, which is a syringe. It almost looks like a wormer. Very easy to use. Depending on the levels of copper that you're looking at, you can just use it a few times a year. You can use it more frequently if you have to, but it's a one syringe done. Once it's down them, it's finished. Whereas there's also liquid supplements that you would then add to the feed daily on a long-term basis. So there's different ways of copper dosing, but I would always consider copper dosing because we know it's low in this country.
Sure. So, ladies, I think with that, I'm going to wrap things up. Just let me pop out of the screen share here.
I think there's a slide you can sit it on. Oh yeah, but was there with the
we're out. we're out of screen.
We're out, yeah.
I just want to say, I want to say firstly to our audience who have stuck with us to now, thank you very much, not just for your presence, but also for your interaction and for your questions. That's always appreciated. But a big thank you to both Nicole and to Erin and to Connolly's Red Mills for your engagement and your information and your conversation. Also appreciated, particularly on a winter night when I'm sure you could be doing other things. So thanks so much for that. And I suppose just from my part to everybody out there, I wish everybody a happy Christmas and a good run into 2024, and look forward to all that comes with that, and new foals and new dreams and all the rest of it. And the next Let's Talk Equine webinar will return on Tuesday the 9th of January 2024. Can you believe it, women?
Yeah, thanks for having us, Wendy. I think it's been great. We could talk for hours on these things. It's a brief introduction, so
for sure.
Questions, I'd say contact us.
For sure. And it is really difficult to sandwich this stuff into a short period of time. And I appreciate that very much. And I hope our viewers appreciate that also. But you are, and your other colleagues are available and there to talk to people, as are, and I have to say it, as are other companies around the country as well too. And there's lots of support out there and help for people as well. So it's really a case of just, sometimes just reaching out and talking these things through, and remembering that, like we said at the very start of the conversation, it's not always just one thing. It's looking at how all the blocks sit and fit together, and where in that maybe there's a weakness or something that can be improved.
They're not always horses definitely aren't simple creatures, so
they definitely always haven't read the book either.
Oh, there's always exceptions to the rule.
That's it. So listen, ladies, thank you very much for being with me. Really appreciate it. Have a lovely Christmas, and I will press the end button here and say goodnight to you all. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you. Cheers, Wendy.
Bye bye.